Now, it was a speech long on rhetoric and for once replete with policy. Ed Miliband's refrain to Labour conference in Brighton was, "Britain can do better than this," and he offered a series of proposals to help tackle what he called the cost of living crisis. A 20-month freeze on energy bills, a boost to house building and apprenticeships, and a cut in rates for small businesses were among the pledges. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is live in Brighton. Gary.
Quite a lot of gambles in Ed Miliband's speech today, gambling that he can enter a personality or character contest with David Cameron and not get a drubbing, hoping he thinks that he can put up decency against, as he sees it, a sort of swaggering confidence. I think gambling too that the deficit will not be absolutely centre stage in the way it was in the last election at the next election. He didn't mention it that much in the speech. And gambling, finally, that the old New Labour trick that Tony Blair and Gordon Brown together cooked up of cozying up to business, that is no longer in the same way the key to getting into number 10. You can do a little bit more to poke business. You remember he described some businesses as predators, some as producers. Today he gave us the first indication of who he sees as the baddies and how he might shake them up. Ed Miliband wanted to give voters a straight cash offer to help with their household budgets. He wanted to puncture the coalition claims that they'd achieved an economic recovery. But he started his speech addressing the personal attacks on him as a bit of a nerd. He talked about coming to the rescue of a woman who'd fallen off her bike.
I helped her up, and afterwards she called me something I'd never been called before. She said I was an action hero. Why are you laughing? And she said what added to all the confusion was that Ed was actually attractive. And not geeky at all. I promise you she did say that.
Ed Miliband wanted to stop the talk of the coalition parties taking the credit for economic recovery. He said it was a recovery built on the backs of low pay, profiteering and inequality.
They used to say a rising tide lifts all boats. Now the rising tide just seems to lift the yachts. Next week, you're going to see David Cameron resuming his lap of honour for how brilliantly he's done as Prime Minister, claiming credit for his enormous achievements, how he's saved the economy, as they put it. I mean, no doubt, he'll even be taking off his shirt and flinging it into the crowd, expecting adoration from the British people, like he did recently on holiday. And maybe I should make this promise while I'm about it. That if I become Prime Minister, I won't take my shirt off in public. I mean, it's just not necessary, is it? I mean,
he said it was a recovery only benefiting the richest. He took on David Cameron's slogan that Britain was in a global race and said Mr. Cameron was presiding over a race to the bottom.
Employers not paying the minimum wage and government turning a blind eye. It's a race to the bottom, not under my government. Shady gangmasters exploiting people in industries from construction to food processing. It's a race to the bottom, not under my government.
Ed Miliband said under the coalition, the big six energy companies have been overcharging customers to the tune of nearly £4 billion a year. If elected, he said, he would act.
If we win that election in 2015, the next Labour government will freeze gas and electricity prices until the start of 2017.
He said a Labour government would break up the big six energy companies and bring in a tougher regulator to keep electricity and gas prices lower.
They've been overcharging people for too long because of a market that doesn't work. It's time to reset the market.
And he sounded like he wouldn't mind resetting the house building market too, if he could, talking about compulsory land purchases to help boost housing. He said he wanted to give the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds, and he tried to turn round his own dismal personal opinion poll ratings, comparing David Cameron's values with what he portrayed as his own unshowy decency.
You see, here's the thing about David Cameron. He may be strong at standing up to the weak, but he's always weak when it comes to standing up against the strong. That's the difference between me and David Cameron. So let's have that debate about leadership and character, and I relish that debate.
He claimed the Tories would fight a negative election campaign against scroungers, trade unions and the public sector, inspired by their hired Australian strategist, Lynton Crosby.
So, David Cameron, I've got a message for you. You can tell your Lynton Crosby it might work elsewhere, but it won't work here. We're Britain. We're better than this.
Today, Ed Miliband put some flesh on some more theoretical speeches of the past. When he talked about predatory capitalists, he obviously had energy companies in mind. When he talked about pre-distribution, he meant taming what the market charges and improving what it pays. He's used some words in the past that people didn't always understand. Do you think you now know what he meant by pre-distribution?
Yes, oh, absolutely. But I'm at an advantage, I've always known.
But it's about prices and...
No, it means a fair
prices
deal.
and income control.
Of course it is.
The announcements today were big enough to drown out Damien McBride's presence on the fringe promoting his new memoirs. Although, as Gordon Brown's one-time press aide spoke to Breakfast TV this morning, his publisher tried to keep an anti-nuclear protester out of the shot. They ended up scuffling on the pavement as the live interview went on.
Mr. Brown, could I just talk to you about
In New
Damien
York,
McBride's
Gordon
book?
Brown refused to answer questions about his former press aide.
Mr. Brown, was Damien McBride acting with your permission?
Back in Brighton, Ed Miliband was closer to Tony Blair than Gordon Brown in his style, showing a readiness to talk personally and informally. But in his central political project, he was tearing up much of their new Labour approach. Gambling that times have changed and voters want to see business stroked a bit less and poked a bit more.